Hello again and welcome to another episode of the Franchise Everything podcast where we talk about everything and anything franchising. And today I'm joined by Vanessa Wilmot, who is the Managing Director of Geotech. How are you, Vanessa?
I'm good, thanks, Glenn. Nice to have you here.
Excellent, thank you. I'm back here at Mount Waverley. We've been here before, haven't we?
Yes.
And Geotech is a data analytics business, isn't it? So what sort of stuff does Geotech do?
That's right. So we're a data analytics and a location planning strategy company. So we help all different types of brands, particularly in the franchise sector, with their network planning, where the opportunity is and where to put new stores, for example, and helping out with network optimization strategies.
Excellent. And today we're going to talk about a few things, but this particular episode, we're going to do a really snappy little bit on managing the impact of cannibalisation on franchise networks, which is a big thing. So let's start with, what is cannibalisation, particularly with around franchises?
Sure. So cannibalisation, so it's a really important consideration for lots of different brands, and in particular in the franchise sector, it's really important for the due diligence of a franchise system. So what cannibalisation is, what it is when a new store or a new territory comes on board for a brand, it's the impact of what impact that new store or new territory will have on an existing or an established brand. So some people like to call it impact, but
it's a pretty hot button, isn't it, for many people?
Definitely. And the reason why it's a hot button is it's not just about the sales or the revenue that a new store or new territory will bring in. It's about that net gain. So what is that new store or territory going to take from surrounding stores? That's really important to consider as well.
And it's particularly hard for franchising, isn't it? Because the franchisor has got a concept that they've done. They've got all this IP, got all this technology and everything they've invested in. They want to maximise their opportunity. So it's a bit of a tightrope, isn't it? Because they want to maximise the opportunity, but they want to make sure that individual franchisees are as profitable as they possibly can be as well.
Absolutely. So it is, like you said, that really fine line or that tightrope. So what you want to do is there's always going to be, especially for an established brand, a little bit of consideration towards cannibalisation, and it's all about what level of cannibalisation a brand can wear. Is
that right? So that actually, so existing brands or established brands have like a tolerance for cannibalisation.
A tolerance, because I mean, the thing with cannibalisation too is if the same brand doesn't take a site, there's a chance that a competitor might as well. So
it's defensive in a way, isn't it?
It can be defensive at times, but it's really about for the franchisor being able to grow the brand, but it needs to be a win-win situation as well. So not then taking too much from the existing store network. So it's really, like you said, that tightrope or that fine line to win-win for both franchisor and franchisee.
So it surprised me because I've known a little bit about cannibalisation, obviously, and you hear some war stories, I suppose, from previous networks over many years. So brands actually do consider, okay, how much, I suppose they technically do, don't they? How much are they going to cannibalise from this site if they put this one in?
Yes,
is that part of the conversation?
Definitely, absolutely. And obviously for a newer brand, it's not as much of a consideration because they can space stores or territories out. But in particular for sort of established brands, it's a really important consideration, and you really have to think about that net gain, like I mentioned before. So it's not only what revenue that the store or territory will do, but how much is going to come from other surrounding stores as well.
So when an established brand looking to put in your site, see, I've got to beam up on it now. I'm thinking through all these scenarios now about cannibalisation. So when they're putting a new location in, so do they factor it and think, okay, are they taking anything off, say, the predicted sales of a new location due to cannibalisation, or what it's going to do to other ones? What sort of thinking is around it and discussions around it at those times?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because you're at the coalface of that, obviously.
Yes, yeah. So if cannibalisation becomes too high, then there might be a chance that they say no to a particular store.
Yep.
Then there's other considerations as well. So, for example, if it's going to be high cannibalisation, they might offer, if it is a site, they might offer the most impacted franchisee the first right of refusal to that site to sort of mitigate.
There's a mitigation strategy.
Strategy for if it's the same franchisee. So we have seen sometimes, franchisors opening sites where there is high cannibalisation if it is the same franchisee.
Yep.
At other times they will say absolutely no, it takes too much. Even though we gain this amount of sales, if it takes too much away from existing stores, then sometimes it will be not approved. And then vice versa. We do sometimes get situations where, a franchisee might think that they're going to be cannibalised terribly by a new store opening, but then once we run some analysis and tell them what the expected impacts are, it can actually be a lot lower than they thought as well. So
it can work in reverse.
It can work in reverse too. Yeah. So they might think a site's going to be very heavily impacted, but then it just might not be, depending on a lot of different factors like distance from the store, travel times, and attractiveness of the store and that sort of thing.
So what sort of things impact it? So does it depend on the type of brand or type of business, or so when you, because I mean I reckon you do, so you do everything from mobile franchises, I imagine, to QSRs, to all different types. What are the main dependent things that impact what's going to cannibalise and what isn't?
Yeah, definitely. So it does depend on the brand and the industry a lot as well. So what we find is for a lot of impulse-driven brands, so that can include a lot of things like your coffee shops or QSRs and that sort of thing. So a lot of impulse-driven brands, cannibalisation becomes less of a consideration, so they can put stores a bit closer together potentially. It can lessen the impacts of cannibalisation because an impulse-driven brand or store is one that people will go to as a result of passing by.
Yeah.
So they're not actually travelling from a distance or anything like that. They're just walking past and think, oh, I'm going to pop into that QSR.
So it's purely because you're on that side of the road and it's too hard to get across to that one. Yeah,
that's right. So so the spacing for impulse-driven brands, they can generally put stores a little bit closer together in general. Obviously, still need to be a bit mindful. You don't want to be too close. On the flip side, we do a lot of work for destination-driven brands. So destination-driven brands are ones where people will seek that brand out or seek out that either that service or that offering. So a good example is home improvement brands. So like shopping for a lounge or shopping for a bed, you're not just going to walk past and all of a sudden buy a bed. Normally they're premeditated types of purchases. So for more home improvement or destination-driven brands, you need to really factor in cannibalisation a lot more. They have to, because they pull from a wider area and from broader areas, the impacts of cannibalisation will need to be considered even more so than an impulse-driven brand.
It must be hard. I mean, can you give some insight on this from territory playing? Not so much even on cannibalisation here, but for those destination brands, that must be very challenging when, say, there's a home improvement centre, that's there and stores open up, and then there's another home improvement centre open up half a K down the road or 2 Ks down the road.
Yes.
So what are they doing? Are they using defensive strategies then? You're seeing brands doing it and opening there, or relocating, or have you seen that type of stuff in action?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have had situations where a brand might decide to relocate if the new homemaker centre becomes, for example,
the hot one, or because they can't put another franchise in, obviously.
Yeah, or someone like some of the bigger name brands move there, like say for example a Bunnings move there or Harvey Norman move there. So it's also about assessing the strength of those homemaker precincts too. So having access to things like average ticket size data, which is really important for home improvement types of brands, so it's spend per transaction. So we can sort of assess those homemaker precincts to see which one would be better and looking at the types of adjacencies.
So how do you do that with the one that's brand new, for example?
That's a little bit
demographics
difficult.
And so on around?
Yeah, you can use the demographics, looking at the levels of working populations, looking at what's around both precincts as well. So what looks most attractive for that particular brand, whether they probably within 2 Ks, a more destination-driven brand that would probably not put 2 stores that close together, but they would consider which one looks like the strongest offering for them. Because I think within that sort of, I mean, every brand is different, but within that sort of distance for a destination-driven brand, it's probably going to be a bit close.
Yeah, I can suppose, well, for cannibalisation there, but I picture what you mean by, say, if you've got a homemaker centre or 2 of them, 2 kilometres apart, and that one's just got a handful of independents or a handful of franchises there, and this one has a Harvey Norman and a Bunnings and everything, you'd probably be looking at a relocation strategy, wouldn't you?
Yeah, definitely, because a lot of people will more likely be drawn to where there is that cluster of the bigger name brands in that type of situation. So
yeah, okay. So the key thing is minimising cannibalisation. So how do brands work around minimalising? And I suppose because franchisees need comfort for this as well, don't they?
Absolutely.
So how do they go about it?
So every brand needs to come up, I guess, with their own strategy. So some of the types of strategies that we've seen is probably the biggest one is looking at primary catchment areas. So that may or may not include territories. So looking at things like consumer travel patterns and movements to see what the primary catchments are around a particular site. And that will show how far or how close people are coming from to frequent a particular store or within a particular territory. So then you can see, if you were to put another store in, say, 3 Ks up the road or 5 Ks up the road, how much overlap that there would be between the consumers visiting sort of one precinct over another. So a lot of our clients do use that type of information, like mobile device data, to look at things like consumer travel patterns and movements.
Yep.
Sometimes some of our clients have their own customer data as well, so we can plot out their real customers and where they're coming from and going to. So that'd be
hugely valuable, I think.
Hugely valuable
argument or equation.
Yeah, the mobile device data, if they don't have customer data, or using a combination of both, because the mobile device data looks at the total market, not just their customers. So really seeing where the opportunities are or the gaps are, and then seeing, so that can show two things. One, it can show how much overlap there is and if there is going to be any cannibalisation or not, or it can show sort of white space as well. So there could be extra opportunity in a type of area.
I suppose, do you play a role then in this, when it's minimising cannibalisation, do you play a role in then the data to try and help the franchisor give comfort to franchisees, existing franchisees?
Absolutely.
And how does that conversation sort of go, or that briefing sort of go?
Yeah, absolutely. So we help our clients interpret the data as well. So sometimes that can be a little bit difficult to decipher through all of that data and come to the conclusion. So we help with that as well. So the conversation would normally go something like, we would tell them an estimate of cannibalisation on the existing territories or store network and what percentage of cannibalisation would be expected from each store. And when that happens, if it's going to be high, normally the franchisor would be like, no, we're not going to go ahead with this. Or if it's going to be low, then we might put a few sentences together for the franchisor to say, if they were concerned it was going to be very high, to say, look, it's low. It's not going to be as high as you think. It's actually going to be low because of these reasons. So some of those reasons could include that there's a travel barrier between the two locations, for example. So sometimes it's not just about the distance between the new store and the existing. If there is
there's a freeway between
it, or a river or a train line, and consumers can't get from one side to the other, some of the data that we have access to actually can clearly show that people don't cross a lot of barriers, and they can be either real barriers, and sometimes they're just psychological barriers as well. We see the different roads and that type of thing.
It's just got me thinking in this chat that your data on cannibalisation for established businesses, I imagine, has got as much to do with keeping a good franchise relationship as it does anything else, because I suppose contractually in franchise agreements, they can already do it anyway if they wish in many cases. That's already set in stone, isn't it, where they'll be able to put another business.
Yes.
And then it's more whether it's conscionable or not. Isn't
definitely.
To be able to put it there. So you'd be helping that relationship, I suppose, making sure it's a reasonable decision.
Making sure it's a reasonable decision. So, showing that due diligence and saying for a franchisor to be able to say to a franchisee, look, no, we're not going to go ahead with this new store. It's just too close. It's going to be too much cannibalisation.
That shows good faith, doesn't it?
Good faith. Or, look, it's not going to be as high as what you would expect, and these are the reasons why. So we are going ahead with it because it's only going to be minimal or negligible. So, it's really nice to be able to help support that relationship.
I've never actually thought of it like that, but I think it does. A relationship keeper, I suppose. So as we wrap up, a key advice, you think, to franchise networks working with you or not, what's your key advice as far as managing that cannibalisation or the prospect of it within their networks, whether they be QSR or mobile or whatever it may be?
I think it's all about considering what the net gain is or isn't in terms of, the expected revenue from a store or a territory versus what's going to be cannibalised from the existing network. So really keeping in mind that net gain. Really, as I said before, each brand is different. So it's really about considering, what the tolerance level is for your particular brand to be a win-win for the franchisor and the franchisee, because you don't want to be cannibalising excessively from the existing network, because that's no good for anyone.
Pretty unhappy.
And you're going to have unhappy franchisees. But then at the same time, you don't want to be prohibiting growth of the brand itself either. So it's really that fine line, as you mentioned. So a lot of it, the final advice therefore would be, to do the research and really think about what type of brand you are. Are you more impulse driven? Are you more destination driven? Are you picking up on more transient consumers or consumers coming from the local population areas? And all those considerations can then feed into what your cannibalisation strategy should look like moving forward.
And I imagine be transparent.
And being transparent, absolutely.
That will solve, even if you are going to cannibalise, just be transparent about what's actually happening.
Yeah, rather than not being transparent and then people getting surprises later and not being happy.
That's even worse.
That's even worse. Yeah.
Excellent. All right, great advice, Vanessa. Thanks
Thank
so
you.
much for filling us in on cannibalisation.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Glenn.
Great. And that's another one from the Franchise Everything podcast. Hope you enjoyed this. If you like this sort of stuff, please share, subscribe, do all that sort of thing. And we'll catch you in the next one soon.